Hi, it's me, Egbert, E-G-G-B-U-R-T, the owner of this radio station. I invite everyone to listen, no matter if you're young, old, black, white, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, heck, I even want real estate agents listening to my station. Yes, even Rick and Tracy. You're all welcome. Now, it's back to my Goodwill ambassadors, Brad and John.
Okay, John, I am, and even though you make fun of me, I'm putting on my Pastor Brad hat here for a minute, okay? And we have this new station. It's not on the air yet. We're trying to get it on the air. It's streaming right now, called God Squad, and you can check it out at godsquad.cloud. It is the church that I am forming. And I know John talks about this all the time, and John is mentioned this many times to all his shapely women friends that they should be attending godsquad.cloud. And so, and so far, they've not attended godsquad.cloud. Okay, so I am learning by observation what it takes to be one of the, quote, what would you call these, new age churches, modern churches, contemporary churches?
Yeah, I just consider them like Nickelback churches, but Nickelback band churches, yeah.
Okay, so we've already talked about the fact. As a matter of fact, there's this guy. I think I mentioned him before. It's pretty funny. He's got a YouTube channel and he puts these videos out. And he had to be involved in these kind of churches at some point in time in his life. He looks like he's late 20s, early 30s. I think his name is Taylor Chance, if I'm not mistaken. And he puts up some really funny videos. And one of the videos he's got on there is he is doing role playing and he's pretending he's a church consultant. And these are little 60-second, shorts on YouTube. And first thing he starts off is he's complaining about the fact that when he walked into the church, there was no greeters. Okay, if you've been to one of the new style churches, the pastor himself is typically out front shaking hands. Hey, thanks for coming today. And if it's a bigger church, he has other people out there shaking hands. And if it's a really big church, he has other people out there shaking hands who have lanyards on identifying them as members of the church, okay? So then he goes and talks about, and it's funny, he makes and once again, there's another scene in this little video that he's back in the green room of the church, and he's criticizing this particular church because they don't have much of a food spread. Matter of fact, he says that if Tim Tebow were to come to that church and go to that green room, he would be through that spread in minutes. So he immediately grabs his wallet and grabs out his Costco card and a credit card, and he tells one of the people that run the church, go buy some stuff at Costco, okay? Then he stands up on stage and he complains that the video wall behind the stage is not big enough. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you've been to any of these churches lately, they have video walls. And we talked about it last week that the essentially pastors dress a special way. John, and how would you describe that? I think you described it very well, John.
Just they're hipster. Like they have a pair of tattered jeans that probably you should put on a man that's 30 pounds lighter.
Okay.
You could probably, if you had a really good doctor, you could probably test for testicular cancer visually, let's just say.
Okay, so I'm leading up to the point where on Sunday afternoon on my Facebook feed, I see my friend Brian Nieves. Now, first off, I'm not making fun of Brian Nieves. Well, maybe to a certain extent I am. But Brian Nieves worked for me. I wouldn't say worked for me. He worked with me. He did my morning show on the old talk station years ago called The Mouth, which quite honestly was today in its reincarnation is crap. It's an AM station. And we, at one point in time, were kicking butt with that radio station because Brian Nieves, and what's funny about this is Brian Nieves has never been on the radio before. I tell him one day, and this is honest to God true story. This is sort of like a Andrew Bailey story. I was listening to 97.1, and all I would hear was Brian Nieves every day. Here's Brian Nieves, and at the time he was a state rep. Here's Brian. I think that was the days back in the day that was Jamie Allman was doing the morning show. So I got Brian Nieves' phone number. I knew his phone number because he actually bought advertising on the station, and I do appreciate Brian all the years you did buy advertising on the station when you ran for state rep and state senate. I called him up, and I said, Brian, you're on 97.1. You live real close to the radio station. Why don't you come on and be at my radio station? So he says, well, why don't I come in and talk to you about it? That was a Wednesday. He comes in on a Wednesday, and we talk about what he could do. And I said, Brian, we can talk all morning long. Just come in tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, and I'll show you how the equipment works. And Dave Bailey was guy with him. I'll show you how it works. It's not that complicated. I'm across the hall in the other station. We'll just put you on the air and see what happens. And Brian's like, what? You're going to put me on the air? Yeah, we'll just put you on the air for 2 hours. So we put him on the air for 2 hours, and that's Thursday. And Friday comes along, and Friday he got off the air, and I said, what do you think? He says, well, let's go. I enjoy doing this. That's how I started the show. Okay, Brian has always been a very religious guy. So back to my story. Sunday, after his church, he's talking about how, and this is his line, which is sort of interesting, the pastor, I don't know the pastor's name. The pastor had this great line that you can't be a part-time Christian because Satan is a full-time devil. Okay? Now, when you think about that, and it's to the point where it's sort of catchy. Okay? If you're a part-time Christian, and, it's sort of like, you can use the analogy that if you're a part-time exterminator and the bugs are full-time, guess who's going to win? The bugs are going to win, right? Right? And
yeah.
you could use the analogy in many different ways. So I see what he's saying. So he puts a picture of his pastor on stage. And guess what is behind the pastor? A big honking video wall. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, here we go again. Got to have a video wall behind the pastor. But here's my question to you, John. My question to you is, I am lacking something that this pastor had. He was dressed like Mr. Hipster, and he had on a short-sleeve shirt. But I'm lacking a very important part of, I think, the modern-day pastorship. And you know what that is, John? 10 guesses.
Is it one of those microphones that's on your head that looks like Star Trek?
No, he had one of those. I'll give you a hint.
Let's see. Is it hair product?
No, I'll give you a hint. I said, and I sort of gave you the hint, but you didn't pick up it. He had a short sleeve shirt on. Okay? So Think about that for a minute. I was able to view his arm. His bare arm.
Oh, you're missing a tattoo.
Oh, I'm missing the sleeve tattoo. He had the tattoo from his elbow all the way up onto his hand.
Nice, good for him. Well, Brad, you could get what are they called, henna? You could get like a henna tattoo that's not real, right?
So, do you think that's going to prohibit me from being successful with God Squad since I don't have a tattoo in my arm?
I don't think so. I think that anywhere north of 85 years old, I think that would probably be a turn off. Like, if you're between 80 and 84, I think that'd be okay. But Brad, you're pushing 90 now in one of your alternate birthdays, so I don't think I think that would be kind of a turn off.
Man, see, what's interesting to me is I get myself in trouble for saying this. Okay. There's a formula for these new style churches, and once again, I'm not making fun of it. It is what it is. There was a time when if you went to a fast food restaurant, you got out of your car and went inside. And then all of a sudden one day, I don't know who it was, somebody said, well, you know what? Let's put a little speaker in back of the restaurant, and you can drive up that speaker, and you can talk to the guy inside. You can give your order, and then you can drive around to the drive-through window and place your order. And people went, oh, that's never going to work. Who'd want to do that? Matter of fact, can I tell you something? Back in the day, I'll give you this, and you're not going to believe this, but when I can remember this when I was a little kid, and we used to live in Jennings. I lived in Jennings for a while. I don't know if I told you that or not. And my mom would take us. I can't remember what we'd go downtown for. We'd go downtown and we'd come back, I believe, on West Florissant, and there was a White Castle in North City. Okay, and they had curb service. Okay, curb service at White Castle, and there was a woman who would come to your car, and she would run out to your car, and at several locations in the parking lot, there was a steel pole that was embedded in concrete, and on that pole was a little box with a speaker and a button on it, and she would take your order, and then she would walk over to this pole, hit the button, and she would give the order over the speaker to the people inside. In other words, you didn't do it. There were only so many of these within the parking lot, and she relayed the order inside. Okay, so now we have, as standard equipment, almost every fast food place has a drive-through, and some of them they're very fancy, like the McDonald's. You got the double drive-through, and it has the video screen and shows you what you're ordering, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I guess the same things happen to these churches where if you want to be a successful contemporary church, you got to have the pastor outside greeting people. You got to have the green room with lots of stuff in there. You got to have the band, which is you call like the fake Nickelback band. Is that what you call them?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like listening to Nickelback. It's not, it's not bold enough to offend anybody, but it's, you can kind of sway back and forth, pick up words as you go along.
You got to have the Nickelback van. You got to have the video wall. You got to have the pastor who looks like he's the guy that just walked out of the Goodwill store, and that's where he bought all his clothes. Right? Isn't that how? Right. No, I mean
that's true. No, that's good. That's good. That's a good observation, Brad.
Okay. One other thing, I never talked about this. About a month or so ago, I watched. Of all crazy things, I love documentaries. I've always been a documentary fan, and I keep telling you about. You should keep watching. It's actually a docudrama, the movie The Big Short. And the more I tell John, the less he's going to watch that movie.
Yeah, I'm not going to. Go ahead.
But I watched the Nickelback documentary, and it was fascinating. I mean, and once again, they addressed the whole thing of, Nickelback. It's like a punchline. Oh my God, a bunch of guys get on stage and they turned into Nickelback. And what's interesting about it is, you talk about a humble beginning. These guys all came from some crappy little town in Canada where, I mean, like literally, like small town.
Is there a non-crappy town in Canada, Brad?
Yeah, there's lots of non-crappy towns in Canada.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Just like I have a friend of mine who all she wants to do is live in I call it a CLH. She wants to live in Kirkwood or Webster Groves, and I always say, you want to live in a crappy little home, because that's all there is in Kirkwood and Webster Groves. But that's a whole other story. The documentary was fascinating. And these guys, I mean, talk about busting it and talk about, working hard and talking about, and to the point where they one point in time they had friends of theirs that lent them money to keep the band going and lent them money to press their own records and stuff like that. And, and living in the back of a van and driving from bar to bar to bar, playing their music and stuff like that. And talked about how when it started to take off, that one of the guys in the band, I think it was the drummer, he just like, man, this is not for me. This is getting a little big time. So they replaced him. It was really interesting. I mean, and if you get a chance, and I was surprised at how much old video they had. The interesting thing about it is you go back into things that happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, unless there was somebody there from a news crew, with like back in the old day, the 16 millimeter, cameras that like the TV station used to use. You don't have any video of anything like that. Nowadays, even when you go back in the 70s and 80s, somebody that was there with their big VHS, camcorder that you put on your shoulder. Remember the original ones had the big old monstrous VHS camcorders, and there's a lot of video. There was a lot of video in this. It was pretty interesting. Okay.
I thought that real quick, I thought the interesting thing, I once looked this up, and the song, This Is How You Remind Me.
Right.
I don't know if did he tell the story of him writing that song?
I don't remember that. I mean, they didn't go too much. It wasn't too much into the music. It was more of like, these are the guys, this is where they came from, this is how they got where they're at, and they talked about some of the pitfalls that came along, with success and things like that. They didn't really delve too much into the music. It wasn't
okay. Well, quickly, he had, before there were algorithms, I think it was Chad Kroeger, the lead singer. He said that he wanted to write his idea was to look at every aspect of the most popular songs ever written and try to overlap and see, like, reverse engineer what they had in common. And that's how he ended up with This Is How You Remind Me. He took all the elements from the most popular songs and tried to force them into one song. And that song ended up being a huge hit. I just thought that was awesome. Before there were algorithms, there were people actually writing stuff down and trying to figure out commonalities.
Well, the interesting thing about it was, I remember when Nickelback was like one of the featured artists on The Point, and The Point's like the new hip.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And then it got to be, we're not playing any Nickelback. And I'm going like, man, there's so much good Nickelback music out there. And once again, these guys are not a bunch of fakers. They're not like, the Backstreet Boys, something like that, where somebody, cooked together a bunch of guys. And once again, the Backstreet Boys and the NSYNC guys, very talented. Look at Justin Timberlake, who came out of that. But it was just really interesting. Okay, last thing to talk about. I find this always fascinating that there's an aspect of me, and maybe because of the fact that a long time ago, I heard this term for the first time, and I thought it was sort of interesting, asymmetrical warfare, okay? Asymmetrical warfare is fascinating because of the fact that essentially The reason we are a free country, and the reason in 1776, when we signed the Declaration of Independence, when our forefathers signed that document, the Declaration of Independence, and then we fought the British, the reason we won is because the Americans practiced asymmetrical warfare. The idea being is you had these very well-trained British troops in their red coats, and they would stand out in the field battle, and they'd walk in a line, and they would fire in unison. And here you had the Americans, who were like a bunch of ragtag soldiers who were hiding behind rocks and climbing up in trees and things like that. Okay, so you get the idea. Okay, the USS Cole was almost sunk. What was that, in Yemen, where a billion-dollar Navy vessel was almost sunk by two dudes in a dinghy, a rubber dinghy with an outboard engine and a couple $1,000s worth of fertilizer that they turned into an explosive, blew a hole in the side of the ship, killed many of our American sailors, and almost sunk the ship, okay? Asymmetrical warfare. So in other words, someone spending very little money essentially attacking a very expensive military device, okay? I saw this video the other day, and I thought to myself, if this is a real video, this is really interesting. It showed, and once again, there's some of these things now that if you watch videos, you're not sure if this is real or this is, some of these RPG, the role-playing games have gotten so good with the video. You know what I'm saying? To the point where he's going like, okay,
Yeah.
am I watching something real, or is this like, AI generated stuff like that? It showed a Russian helicopter being brought down by a drone, and what did the drone do? The guy piloting the drone flew the drone into the tail rotor of the helicopter. Now, for those of you don't know about helicopters, there's the main rotor, which is essentially the thing that provides you lift and makes you go forwards, backwards, blah 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 blah. There's the tail rotor. The tail rotor is the main rotor is horizontal to the ground, and the tail rotor is vertical to the ground. The tail rotor gives you directional stability, because what happens is, if you were not being counteracted by the tail rotor, when you started to apply, torque to the main rotor system, the body of the helicopter would rotate in the opposite direction of
Oh my gosh.
the main rotors. In other words, if you don't have that tail rotor, and what the tail rotor does, the tail rotor keeps the helicopter going straight. And if you're flying a helicopter, you have essentially, four controls, actually five, but for the most part four. You have your tail rotor pedals, which are, your left foot's on the left foot, the right foot's on the right foot. Then you have what's called the cyclic, which is the thing between your legs. John's going to say something about that. The cyclic between your legs, which gives you, directional control. And then you have what's called the collective, which is you pull up with your left hand, which puts pitch in and out of the blades. And essentially, as you put in more pitch and put in more throttle, you have to constantly adjust the tail rotor. So if all of a sudden the tail rotor goes away, and this is a very common problem with helicopters crashing, for some reason the tail rotor has a mechanical issue, the drive shaft breaks, the gearbox breaks, the tail rotor essentially stops working. It's almost assured that you're going down, and you're going down hard. And rarely does anybody not literally crash a helicopter that has a loss of a tail rotor. I mean, if in Alan Bartlett's days, he used to kid about the fact that he didn't crash helicopters, he had hard landings, or sometimes he would call it a soft crash, okay? I'm thinking to myself, here you're knocking down a multi-million ruble helicopter with a $500 drone. And I'm going like, God, this is interesting. I mean, once again, you see this all the time in these videos. The Ukrainians have adopted these off-the-shelf drones, and they modify them to like hold hand grenades. And you've seen these, I don't know if you've seen these before, these videos of the guys with the drones hovering over like a tank with the guy's got the turret open, what do you call it, the hatch or whatever you call it on the top of it, and they drop a hand grenade into a tank, and the tank explodes, and all the guys are killed. Once again, $1,000 drone taken out, $1,000 drone takes out a multi-million-dollar tank. I find it fascinating. And I think the thing that's interesting about us, That's what we need to be afraid of. You saw the same thing happen. You saw a 20-year-old guy climb up on a roof in a building and almost kill the former president and, a presidential candidate with very low-tech experience. The guy's 20 years old. He's never been a sniper before. He's never been trained or anything like that. See, that to me is what's scary. Is the asymmetrical aspect of and so many ways, different things. Like I see things all the time, and like for example, Mark Reardon talked about the fact. Here's another thing. Talks about the fact that his internet keeps going out in his house, and he's very upset. So he sent a nasty note to Spectrum saying, "Why is my internet going out all the time?" And they replied essentially saying, "We're having vandalism in your area. Somebody keeps cutting our fiber optic cables." You're going like, wow, that's spooky, because of the fact that most alarm systems now in an area, if you have Simply Safe or any of the alarm systems, guess how it reports back to the central station? On the internet. And if you knock out a whole neighborhood, guess what? You go rob everybody's house if they have alarm systems. Don't you think that's spooky, John?
It's so spooky. Speaking of asymmetrical expenses, what concert costs 45 cents?
Nickelback.
50 Cent featuring Nickelback. That joke is courtesy of one of our listeners. And Ben, I'm sorry, we went 4 minutes over. I was talking about throttles and the logistics of engineering helicopters. So sorry about that.
I'm sorry, John. I'll never do it again. I apologize. And as soon as I get the show chopped up, I'm heading to Lululemon's.
All right, I'll see you there.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?